run marketing for our software business. And you may ask, so what the hell is Alcatel-Lucent doing in software? They're a legacy, they're a dinosaur, they're part of the past, they're part of the problem. And I'll talk a little bit about that today because I think what we're going through as a company to transform ourselves is actually what the industry needs to do. So we're a good representation of what needs to be done and what can be done. So a little bit about us, because I thought I would start with why is this guy up here talking about this stuff. So in the space of NFV and cloud, we actually started developing the idea of what is now NFV 3 years ago in a very small team in our company. And we actually started a venture 2 years ago out of Israel called Cloudman, focused on building and designing what the cloud infrastructure for telecom would look like in the future. In addition, in April, we actually launched an SDN venture here in Mountain View called Nuage Networks. Both these things are very controversial in our company because we're changing the status quo and we're challenging long-held beliefs. But what we've seen is dramatic change over the last 9 months to a year, and that the majority of our portfolio now, our NFVs, our virtual applications, are now virtual. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why that's not enough. And by end of 2014, most of our applications will be running in the cloud. And I'll explain a little bit what that means. Today, we're also working with 9 different leading operators around the world, kind of the who's who, the early adopters, the doers, around what does this mean for their business? Let's try some things out. And we'll talk about some of the things that we're trying out, improving in. We started an ecosystem program 2 months ago. We have 25 partners, another 20 signed up. Metaswitch is a partner. And this point's very interesting. Metaswitch is also a competitor, but yet they're a partner. And I think for this industry to be successful, we need to see more of that. And the last thing is fly our own jets. So we've created our own lab in the company. We have well over 1,000 people spinning up VMs, linking them to the network, moving their applications to the cloud across Alcatel-Lucent globally. 100 different projects. We have customers on our lab. We have partners on our lab. So anytime someone in our company now wants to talk about how do I build something on the cloud, they have an environment to do that inside. And we gather a lot of learnings from that. So just a little context for what I'm about ready to explain, and that is what we've learned along the way. Early days, clearly, but I'm happy to share the progress so far and kind of our observations. So what is NFV? Steve outlined a nice list, and I'll just give a few more anecdotes here. So for us, it's definitely decoupling the control and the data planes. If you think about how we've built telecom software in the past, these things were tightly integrated. There's all these logical representation of these two things, but from a practical perspective, tightly integrated. This will change. The next we talk about this a lot, common compute, storage, network infrastructure that we build our applications on. What I want to say here, though, is the NFV is a poorly phrased term. This isn't about virtualization. It's about cloudifying the network. If all we want to do is run on virtual storage and virtual compute resources, you don't get the gains and the benefits that we need to achieve as a software telecom industry. Deconstructing the stack. What's beautiful about open source technology now is we don't have to build software infrastructure anymore. We can take what's out there and we can apply the telecom expertise that we have and use the best of the open source community. So talk a little bit more about this, but we maintain that standards in telecom are moving from a classical kind of traditional, we all get together in a room and we define a standard over 5 years, to open source being the standard. And then how do we apply it to the telecom industry? And then the last is the network, right? So how do you make the network more programmable? A lot of the stuff that we build from an application perspective today in telecom is heavily network dependent. distributed architectures, a lot of networking between functions, a lot of chaining. That really needs to happen at the network layer, thus our investment in SDN, so forth and so on. Now, what I wanted to talk a little bit about is the why. So when the Etsy group got together and they wrote their paper and we all started talking about this as an industry maybe a year ago, the number one thing we want to do is lower cost structure, and we're still talking about that, right? And that's still important. See the growth curves and the cost curves, and it's all about reducing costs. The mindset, though, in the leading operators we talk to, is moved to, it's more about time to market. So if you think about the rudimentary way I think of telecom is that, and if you want to know where to get this information, check out Chet and Sharma. But it's very simple. We made money in voice, then we made money in SMS, now we make money in data. And that's our industry in a nutshell. What comes after data? We don't know. I'd maintain there will be no more mass market telecom service after data. After data, you're competing with the rest of the software industry. If you want to get into cloud computing, you're competing with Google and Amazon. If you want to get into connected homes, you're competing against cable companies and over-the-tops. If you want to get into healthcare, it's another set of competitors. So the world beyond telecom and beyond selling mobile data or broadband data is really a redefinition of telecom, because we're just competing in new markets like everybody else. And each one of those markets, your software, your network is running on a cloud architecture. So for our customers that actually have life and relevancy after data, whatever that market is that they're getting into, it needs to be driven by cloud infrastructure and cloud software. So obviously cost efficiencies are important, but what we like to look at is the end-to-end cost structure. It's just not about the hardware, it's about cycle time reduction. So if you go back to kind of where lean and agile principles started in manufacturing, and you try to apply that to telecom, today, to turn up capacity or launch a new service can take 12 to 24 months. And that needs to change. Now we're talking about doing something in 3 months, or 3 weeks, or 3 days. That's a phenomenal amount of capital that you free up in order to invest in new technologies and new markets. So yes, it is about reducing hardware infrastructure, but more importantly, it's the OpEx as well and the cycle time reduction. That's how you get the cost savings. And that's why that will drive some of the behaviors I'll talk about in a minute. New opportunities and value chains we talked about. And the last is continuous improvement. So Steve mentioned DevOps model, going from getting a team together, building out a waterfall, upgrade to a network to something that you're doing now instead of once a year, twice a year, quarterly, monthly. This changes fundamentally the process and the way our industry thinks about launching new capabilities, and also changes the way the vendor community supports our customers. So let me jump into this a little bit. So what have we seen? 2012, 2013, and most of our industry is still here. We're in the CTO camp, we're in the research camp, we're talking about what it means for a given customer. Where are they going to start? What's the budget? What's the business case? Asking a lot of questions and so forth. We see the early adopters, the doers, starting to put together dedicated teams. And what's important here is it's moving out of just the CTO realm into a realm of network operations. So the types of questions change. How am I going to operate a virtual world in a native world? How am I going to tie this to my OSS? How do my KPIs change, right? So I manage for a certain uptime today in my operations. How's that going to change in the future? And how do I track that and how do I measure that? And this is what we would characterize really as 2013 early adopters really playing around with this, trying to understand what the impact will be. And what we see going forward is 2014, we'll have some people actually putting some of this in the field and giving it a shot. I'd maintain there's not anything really going on right now in production. There'll be some claims from vendor communities about running virtual instances and so forth. But to get to the point that we're really talking about being a software industry, I'd maintain nothing's really happening to much scale today, but we'll see that change in 2014. So what are we doing? What are we working on? So I'll start at the bottom here. I'll loosely characterize the projects. These are all projects we're working to some degree with customers in 3 buckets. You got kind of the classical appliance bucket as it pertains to telecom, DNS, AAA, load balancers, firewalls. You have kind of the control plane, IMS, CDNs, policy, activity. A lot of stuff going on here, a lot of discussion. We're actually seeing RFPs now for this stuff where your solution needs to at least be cloud ready. There's no more talking about we'll catch it in the next RFP or the next RFI. It's you need a part of the requirements in choosing a vendor is, are they there today or are they giving me a path to getting there? And the last is data plane, so packet core. A lot of evolved packet core discussions, which is one of the more tricky areas to actually talk about putting into the cloud. And while we've maintained, for anyone starting, they actually start in this process. Start simple, get more complex, and then get really complex. We have vendors jumping into deep, or customers jumping into deep end. They're going to start with packet core. And if you think about going back to the shift in mindset around where the benefits come from, if you really want to reduce cycle time, cost structure, get the time to market faster, you have to tackle the whole stack. You have to tackle the data plane. That's where the majority of the operational benefits come from. So we started asking ourselves, so why are they doing this? And we see a few examples. We see some customers doing data plane applications to target new types of traffic that's unpredictable, machine to machine, as an example. But we see others tackling data plane, and they're just going to replace their packet core from mobile and go all in. And that's a time frame they're looking at over, starting in 2014 and moving into 2015. Very rare. This isn't the norm for the industry, but there are a select few who are actually hitting that hard. On the top, what we've seen is the dialogue has changed now that we get into projects with operations. Before, the dialogue was around feasibility and scaling, proof, can we do this? Can we make it happen? Now we get into the hands of operations. It's all about how do I do automation? How do I do self-healing? How do I recover from a failure? How am I going to run my data center in an automated way? What's the impact of shared infrastructure? Who gets what resource? How do I scale that out? So the questions and the projects have become much more around the operational impacts. So what are some of our observations? And granted, this is early days. Do it yourself. Very hard. So we have customers who are out there trying to build the entire cloud stack, right? So how hard can it be? I just take OpenStack, I take some hardware, I take some software, I hire a crack professional services team. I can put this together. I can build cloud nodes. I can build cloud in the box. And we're seeing this take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Very expensive. And this isn't even talking about the management and orchestration layer and how you actually operationalize it. So very difficult to do. It's something we've been working on for now 2 years. As an example, we've gotten to the point for cloud in the box where we can turn up a cloud infrastructure in a matter of hours for our customers. So while it's important our customers are in the industry are playing around with this type of technology, I'd caution folks who are starting to start by trying to build everything yourself. You may end up getting there, but the time it takes to actually figure out how to do it as a starting point is eliminating the ability for you to get to some of the operational benefits that you really need to test out. Data plane optimization. So what we're seeing in the early days, it's not all about the same type of cloud infrastructure. We're seeing different requirements for different types of applications. And you can see 2 or 3 different kind of targeted set of cloud infrastructure, depending on if it's an appliance or a control plane function or a packet core. The end game, obviously, is to get to a Google model. We're building our, having data center infrastructure being built in China or Taiwan. I don't see us getting there in the short term for doing that. So what you'll see is in a data center, a variety of different architectures to support different types of network functions. Open and extensible. I'll highlight this one. There's a real risk our industry ends up being, here's a Cisco solution, here's the Alcatel solution, here's the Ericsson solution, here's the Huawei solution. That's how we build networks today. That's how we build network functions today. And if that model goes forward like that, what have you really gained, right? So from an openness perspective, it's openness in the terms of working together, but it's also openness in the terms of technology choices that are made. From the underlying infrastructure to the management and orchestration layer to the applications running on top. These things need to be decoupled, and the decisions need to be made independently of each layer. So, role changes. When we first started talking about this, roles and responsibilities were on the right. And what we're seeing in the engagements we have is this is becoming fundamental. So, I go build a virtual application. I have infrastructure I need to manage. I have the virtual application I need to manage. I have the virtual service I need to manage. I may have some of that service still running native, so that's somebody else. Who manages this? Who has the ownership for this? How are we going to pull it together? How's this going to look in an OSS system? What's the role of management and orchestration and all this from a cloud perspective? Fundamental questions that we're still trying to figure out as an industry, and each customer is trying to figure out how it pertains to their business. In addition to that, when it comes to moving beyond virtualization into a cloud environment, a lot of conversation around full automation in lifecycle management. So if you think about how you manage a network application today, it's pretty painful. Pretty painful to turn up capacity, pretty painful to maintain, pretty painful to do a new software release or a new release because everything's fully integrated. So you put it in a lab, you test it for months, then you put it in the network, then you got to figure out how to move traffic over, and there goes your year, right? So moving forward, how do you automate that process? Your infrastructure is going to be managed by somebody else. Now we're just talking software. So, what's the impact on element management systems for virtual applications? What's the impact on the OSS? Who actually does this within the hierarchy of software? These are all things that are being worked out. How do we do automation? There's a lot of stuff in the open source community today around scripting in different languages versus what we've done in the past. In telecom, which everything was very much proprietary. Cisco did it one way, Alcatel did it another, Ericsson did it a third. So a lot of conversation going on here. You can call that carrier pass. That's what we call it. And the last piece here is multi-tenancy. So you think of multi-tenancy as lowering hardware costs. I think of multi-tenancy as reducing time to market and reducing complexity. So, your infrastructure will be all homogeneous, right? So there will be no more proprietary infrastructure from vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. You'll have a set of servers, a set of storage, a set of networking. And so from a training perspective, that needs to change. How do you retrain your field force? From a spares perspective, it gets more simple. From a maintenance perspective, the cost structure goes down. So multi-tenancy is really not just about, running your network hotter. That's a piece of it. It's really about cycle time reduction and simplicity and taking costs out of the entire system. So let me summarize a few things that we think are important as we move forward based on what we've learned over the last few years. And I've mentioned this before. Life cycle management. How are you going to manage the application going forward? Who does what? Is it the cloud management system? It's the OSS? Is it the virtual network function? Is it all of the above? How do they all work together? And how they do that in an automated way. Converged data centers. You actually have to build a data center. You need to turn up capacity quickly. You need to buy more infrastructure. How are you going to manage that process and do it in an efficient way at scale? What's the relationship with SDN? The biggest bottleneck, you hear this in data centers, we'll say it in IT, in telecom, The biggest bottleneck is the relationship with the network and making it programmable. So what's that relationship to NFV? What's that relationship to the cloud? When do those things start to come together? Distribution, we didn't talk too much about distribution, but in our industry, applications are distributed. We're not going to put IMS, as an example, in one data center. It's going to be distributed out. Some will be in the core, some at the metro, some at the edge, potentially. So how do you manage not just one or two data centers and applications across one or two data centers, but an application across 15, 20, 30 data centers? What does that look like? Hasn't been solved today in OpenStack community, because in most IT data centers, you don't need to worry about that. Telecom is different. So how do we apply that to our industry? Multi-vendor we talked about. Fundamental belief in two contexts. One around using open source technologies, and the other around the industry working together, and also in working and embracing some of the emerging players that are coming in from a software perspective. We're fairly brutal in our business. If you can't keep up, you can't keep up. We're going to invest in the products and the platforms going forward that can make this evolution to software, and if a product or a platform can't, they'll get left behind. And then operations, fundamental. In every discussion we have with a customer, an analyst, an executive, a person working this day to day, it all comes back to how do I operate this thing. People are now believing I can build it. Now it's how do I operate it. A lot of discussion going on there, and I maintain that's one of the more important things that we need to figure out as an industry in 2014 and beyond. All right, so if you put all this together, what do we believe? We believe management and orchestration is going to be fundamental to this. If you think about where this sits, your cloud platform, it's the glue. It's the glue between the application, the network, the cloud infrastructure. It's the glue to the OSS. It's the glue to the BSS. It could be even the glue to the native environment, because when you think about rolling out these services, a packet core, an IMS, an appliance, you're going to have a mixed bag in your network, right? You're going to have some of these applications running in kind of a native legacy traditional mode, supporting some customers for a period of time. And you're going to have some of these applications running in a virtual world. Even more complicated, you could look at an IMS environment as an example, or a packet core environment. And within that service, you may have some applications running native and some running in the cloud. So managing all that and putting it all together, doing it in an automated way, doing it in a distributed way, management and orchestration, we feel is fundamental to that. Therefore, we're spending a lot of time and investment in that area. From the spin-up of Nuage around SDN and leveraging our knowledge and capabilities in the routing market, even though, like Cisco, the majority of our money has been made building, proprietary chipsets to do routing, we fundamentally believe in the software model going forward, thus the investment. To the management platform that you've heard mentioned, Cloudband, something we started 2 years ago because we fundamentally believe that this was the direction the industry was going. And this is really the linchpin to us working with operators today. Capability doesn't exist. And I won't stand up here and say what we have is ready to go, but what we have is far ahead than anybody else, and something that we can help customers actually prove in new concepts and capabilities around managing and orchestrating network resources. And then last to note, it's actually building the cloud infrastructure. Get folks started, we spent a lot of time doing this ourselves. That does not mean we want to get into reselling servers or reselling storage or any of that. That's not our business. We've invested in this area only to help our industry get there faster. In the end, we don't care if this is our node, somebody else's node, a node built by an operator. We don't care if this is Amazon. We don't care if this is Google. We don't care what the infrastructure is. We'll work with it. But in order to get our industry moving in the right direction, we've spent the time and money to figure out how to do this in a quick and efficient way. So to come back to how do we do this? So how do we how do we invest in this space? And this is fundamental to Alcatel-Lucent and our belief of a software telecom company and industry moving forward. And that is, we need to leverage the best of what exists in IT today, in open source today. This is not about us building new software architectures as an industry, only for the telecom industry. It's about taking what exists and applying telecom expertise to it, and building what we require for our industry, which is high availability, which is distributed architectures. It's a massive amount of security. How do you ensure it? So all the things that we're known for, our value proposition of an industry, we need to take the software that exists today and figure out how we apply it to that. That's the fundamental shift in becoming a software telco industry. It's not about rebuilding all this stuff. It's about leveraging this stuff to do what we need to do for telecom. And last, I'll end, almost end, on we put this together so we could all work together, right? This is the ecosystem we started. This isn't an ecosystem where we get together and we put all our logos, despite the slide, on a slide and put it in front of a customer. This is an ecosystem where we actually do stuff. So how do you take your application and put it on a cloud infrastructure? How do you do automation? How do you do scaling? How do you do self-healing? These are the things that we're working with our partners. For some of these partners, it's paid off. We had a major global tier 1 vendor who wanted to get started in this space, in NFV, sitting down talking to our team. So what we did is we looked at a variety of different places they could start. And they said, what do you think? And we said, well, we have a partnership with this one, and we know them really well. Why don't we start here? Huge opportunity, obviously, for that partner, as well as for us. Now, that's not the main reason you join the program for distribution, but those are the types of things, as partners, you want to see, obviously, pay off at some point in time. And my last slide. So we're heavily committed to this space. We have a fundamental belief that this is the way the industry needs to go. What we need to do as an industry is be aggressive and maintain aggressiveness. What I'd like to see, I'm very positive in the vendor community. I'm very positive with our customers so far. Very aggressive. You know, the domain 2.0 from AT&T. We're seeing RFPs now for virtual EPCs, virtual IMSs. Most of the kind of early adopters of our industry are well down the path. The key for our industry is to maintain that level of aggressiveness and not give up when it gets hard, because it's going to get harder when we actually try to put this into production. We try to manage the multi-environment setup that we have between a virtual world and a native world. When operations gets a hold of this and says, hey, I can't, monitor my KPI the way I've monitored it before in this new world, so we need to kind of put on the brakes. We as an industry need to kind of keep our foot on the gas here and go very, very aggressively. And from a time frame perspective, back to Steve's point, 5 years is a good measurement, but I would say you could also look at where data revenues are peaking and where they start to decline, right? So smartphone penetration, connected device penetration, LTE penetration. This is the gravy train right now for our industry, but it won't be there forever. And when that starts to slow, our industry needs a new revenue model. And that new revenue model is going to come from being a software industry. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for the time. And I'm glad to be here and look forward to the conversation.